It's really a pleasure to be here. And what I want to talk about today is this idea of how do we get data from lots of sources and actually do analysis on it. So it's about platforms, about infrastructures. And the title actually says exactly what I want to say, which is we tend to push for sharing data. The idea that, hey, data is important, let's share it. And I'm here to tell you maybe in some settings it's okay, but maybe in others not. The difference between sharing knowledge without sharing data, as a matter of fact, with keeping data private. So it really is about privacy. And I'm going to start, it's late, it's the last session, we can have a little bit of fun. When I talk to students, usually I try to do this around Valentine's Day. So imagine this following, this is actually a true computer science problem. It's the simplest problem I can come up with related to this question. So you have two parties, a he and a she, and they are interested in each other. And each has one bit, which is I either love the other person or not. And the problem is they don't want the other person to know if they love them and they don't, right? So there's this question. If we both love each other, then it's okay to know that we love each other. But if one person loves the other, right? So that's the question. Can you, without, figure this out? And of course, there's an app for that. So you can go, this is an app, you can get it, which you go in and every party will put in whether they want to date or not. And if both of them want to date each other, they both know. Otherwise, well, it's not going to work out. The problem with this is you have to trust the app. Is there a way to do it without an app? Is there a way to do it where only these two people figure it out? So remember, I don't trust anybody now. It's not like I can get my bit and your bit and then put them to a trusted party and they can tell us. No, I don't want anybody in the whole world to know my bit unless we both like each other. Okay? Well, there's many versions of this problem. The next one is Yao's millionaire's problem. This is also a mathematically problem. So now imagine you have a bunch of people. Each one has a net wealth. And we want to answer the question, who is wealthiest? That's very different than knowing how much money you have. Right? Figuring out who has the maximum is different than knowing how much each one of them has. Is there a way to do that without trusting anybody? Not the government, not each other, nothing. All right. Here's another version. We build systems, and we have a card where people can get access to buildings. Today, every time a student swipes their card, university knows that that student went into that building. Can we answer the question whether the student should be allowed into the building or not without knowing the student? Do you understand this? So the question you want to answer is, the door lock has to answer the question, is Paul allowed to go into the building? It doesn't need to know that Paul went into the building. It wants to know if an individual has access rights to the building at that point. Whether it's Paul or somebody else doesn't matter. You got that? I'll give you another one. This is a very famous lawsuit. It's actually the Department of Labor is suing Google and Oracle because they say, look, there's evidence that you guys are not paying men and women the same. So the Department of Labor wants to sue Google, says, give us your payroll information. We want to look into it. And Google, rightly so, says, well, wait a second, it's private information, it's people's salaries, I don't want to give you that. So the question is, can the Department of Labor determine if there is a discrepancy without being given the data? And in a way that Google cannot argue. It's actually either, if it's true, it's true. Here's another version. This one hits home. BU is home to a famous study of the brain of athletes who are engaged in sort of NFL and so on. And the NFL, this is all used, but actually the National Hockey League is also part of that study. And the National Hockey League, the Players Association, is suing the NHL, saying we want to make sure that when we retire, we'll be taken care of. And they're saying, look, BU says that NHL players are affected. So the judge goes and says, well, BU, the NHL now goes defending themselves, says, well, wait a second, we don't know the brains that BU analyzed. How do we know these brains are brains of players? Maybe they are brains of, I don't know, maybe kids who played in the street but have nothing to do with the NHL itself. So we want to get the records that we can check if these are real players. Again, here the judge wants to ask BU to give us the record. And BU says, wait a second, HIPAA, we can't give you this private information. The question that the judge wants to ask is whether the intersection of the set of players in the NHL and those analyzed by BU is not empty or is exactly the set that BU says it is. It's a set intersection question. It's not really about who is on the list. Do you see the difference? So here's another one. This is very recent, right? You know that the Department of Justice is now probing Harvard admissions, saying, hey, wait a second, you're trying to be, do affirmative action. Maybe the result of this is reverse racism, where maybe now Asian Americans are being they're not treated equally or fairly. Right? So what are they going to do? Actually, they're asking Harvard to give them their records. Is there a way to answer that question without seeing the records? So these are all examples, and let me just say the answer to all these questions, all of them, is yes. So let's first understand what it is. We have a bunch of data sets. It could be 1 bits, it could be huge databases, right? You want to compute a function on them. The function gives you knowledge. For example, whether or not there's bias. That's a yes-no question. Now, so f of this is the knowledge. The question is, what we think about today is somebody has to give me all this data, I'll plug it into my function some way or another, compute it, and give you the answer. And I'm here to tell you, no. I can compute this function with every one of these single data sets remaining private, never ever communicated outside an organization. And I'm going to tell you this story through a real story. So now this is my story. I call it Azer's true story, sort of in the land of lawyers. And I'm a computer scientist, right? But I spent the last 4 years doing nothing but convince folks who have problems that can be solved if you fix that issue, that there is a solution. So I'll tell you what it is. The story starts in 2013 with, in the city of Boston, the late Mayor Menino set up something called the Women's Workforce Council to study gender pay inequity. And, he set this wonderful council, and they wrote a report and says, look, there is an issue there, let's do something about it. And later that year, on December 11th, you see the mayor there signing a compact. A compact means a promise. We will do the following. What are they going to do? First of all, take a look at the companies there. There was over 100 companies. These are major employers, from Raytheon to Fidelity and so on. And they all sat down with the mayor and said, we're going to do something about this. They call it the 100% Talent Compact. And if you zoom in on this, you cannot read it, I'll blow it up. One of the provisions of the compact, there was actually 3 provisions. One is we're going to train employees, one is going to train our HR people, blah, blah, blah. But one of them is the following. Read this. Employers, the 100 plus, agree to contribute data to a report compiled by a third party on the compact's success to date. Employer-level data would not be identified in the report. In other words, we'll all contribute the data, we'll compute some aggregate, and nobody will know whether Fidelity was better than Raytheon or whether Raytheon was better than Bank of America. We don't know that. We just know that on the aggregate, this is the number. You got that? Now, who signed this? It was CEOs and the mayor. Lots of politics, lots of networking, but when it came to executing it, the lawyer said, on our dead body, payroll information is not going to leave the company. This is competitive information, right? And not just that, but the third party that they picked up to do this, a major university on the other side of the Boston University, the lawyers of that university said, we are not going to take that responsibility because if we lose this data, we'll be sued. This is very private data, right? So we had the compact, everybody agreed to it, but it could not be done. Until sort of I learned of this as, well, we can solve that problem for you. It took me a good year talking to people who know nothing about computer science. And I want to convince them of what seems like magic. You have a piece of data, you have a piece of data, I can compute something on both of them. Nobody except you will ever see your data, and nobody other than you will ever see your data. Okay? I had to convince them. I had to convince the IT departments of these companies, et cetera. And sort of in April the next year, we actually described the design. I'm going to spare you the design. This platform is built. And it was actually deployed, and we did our first study. So the way it works is now every company runs in their own company a piece of software where they enter data that's really private to them. But that data doesn't leave their premises. Instead, all the programs in all these companies talk to one another. Using cryptographic approaches, they come up with the answer collectively, right? And if you are an observer, you're looking outside at the bits going around, it's garbage. You got that? Nothing gets leaked other than the ultimate answer. So I'll be happy to talk about the design if you're interested. And this, of course, made the news, right? Because that's the first study ever of its kind. As a matter of fact, got invited to Congress by our representative, Congress. And Catherine Clark, this is a quote in the Boston Globe. She actually was a big proponent of funding to the National Science Foundation, but she was also a proponent of this Pay Equity Act. And this is a quote by her. Nobody would think, oh, the Paycheck Fairness Act, how is that tied to NSF funding? The point that resonated with her is that basic research funding of NSF helped her solve a very complicated social problem. April 28, 2016, that's a year later, we did a second version of this. Actually, this now is happening every year. And remember, the idea is to do this so that we can observe progress, right? So companies will make interventions and so on, and you want to know, is it making a difference? The state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston is putting money into this. They want to make sure if it's working or not, right? And the companies agree to make the aggregate available, but nobody will be able to point a finger. By the way, every company knows what the aggregate is doing, and they know what they're doing. So they also can compare the aggregate to themselves. If I'm below the average, hey, I better do something about it. Nobody knows, but I know, right? If I'm above, I'll pat myself on the back and say, hey, we're doing well, let's do that. So it turns out to be a very interesting social mechanism. This was on point. I love this because the people who spoke to the technology are actually not computer scientists. There are people who realize the value of this. This is Evelyn Murphy. She talks about the technology. It's used in computer science application, but it has never been used for public good. Here, we're beginning to show how to use this sophisticated computer science research for public good. All right. This publication is online. You can go read it. It talks about how this technology was used, this platform was used. And yes, women are paid less. But because, remember, this data is based on payroll information in the companies. 112,600 employee data is considered in this. This is not volunteering data. One of the big issues with this gender inequity issues is that it's all people who don't want to believe it. They say, oh, it's just people volunteer, they have a bone about it, and they just volunteer their numbers. Well, this is ground truth. And it allows you to look at different types of workers. Men, women, minority, different length of service in the company. So you aggregate around different types of people. And then you talk about the aggregate for this. So for example, the study showed that there is actually no inequity for entry-level jobs. The inequities are most pronounced at the executive level, which we all understand, but now we have the numbers, and we know exactly what it is, and we can follow it 1 year after the other. So this was the announcement of that result. You can see me here with the mayor. But actually, maybe to put a fine point on this, the whole nonprofit that was doing this in the city of Boston decided to move to BU. They said, we need to work with the people who develop these platforms because that's much better than us in the city of Boston. So they moved. Their address now is the Boston Women's Workforce Council at Boston University. They're actually funded by the city, but they sit with us because of that platform. As a matter of fact, this morning I got a tweet from them saying, oh, now we got another platform we're going to deploy. So the idea of having platforms that solve this this is a problem. Remember, these companies worry about what? They don't want to store in the Boston Globe saying, hey, look at how Fidelity is bad. They actually worry about their reputation. And that's something we cannot force them to share anything, right? And if we do, they may start faking things, right? So the point is, we should just take it that there is some data that's not meant to be shared, but it has value. So, And this, of course, you do something like this, 2-3 years later, Congress starts acting. So this morning, here's November 16th. This morning you heard, I think, Bill talked about this act passed in the Senate just less than 2 weeks ago, November 16th. This is the act called Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking. So now Senate says we should, we should base decision related to policy on real data. And the reason I put this up is that actually it references our study. And it says privacy and all that stuff should not be an issue because there are technologies to solve that problem. Okay? Here's another one that just passed. This also passed, this one passed in Wyden, Rubio, and Warner. This is called the student's right to know before you go act. What the heck is that? Well, there's a big debate now about all the tuition that students pay to private universities or universities that are there for profit, and they come out in debt, $100,000 in debt, and they can't get a job. So the government wants to say, yes, let's do a scorecard. Let's look at the history of that university, graduating students who get jobs. And let's see the income of graduates of that university 10 years out. So that the student, before they sign up for a university, they know what happened historically. Universities are kicking and screaming and say, we don't want to do that. It can be done because the IRS has all the numbers for employment. They know the salaries of people. Universities have the data. They know the students that they graduated. It's a matter of joining the two. Universities are saying privacy, and that's important, right? But if you can do it without even implicating the university, you can talk about groups of universities. You can talk about research universities versus small liberal art colleges versus East Coast versus West Coast. You can aggregate so that everybody has a reason to say it's not me, it's the aggregate. Remember, people are okay with computing aggregates. When it points to them, maybe they have some issues. So this bill, as a matter of fact, references our work, and I'm actually quoted in some of the supporting documents for that, where the fact that we succeeded with that platform is now giving inertia to this. So this is sort of my story, the history of it. So what is multi-party computation? Seems like I'm showing you this. Well, first of all, it's a technique known for a long time. So this is something that's invented in 1979, long time ago. It's a mathematical approach to do computation. And as I explained what it is, you compute an f. The only thing that gets computed is f, nothing else. So notice that if I want to compute another function, I have to do this again. If I give you my data, you can compute any function on it. But if you do this, you are only allowed to execute the function I agreed to, nothing else. Right? So I, the owner of the data, keep the value of the data to myself and have to agree on every computation that gets done with it. Turns out this has huge applications. For example, I volunteer my genetic information to study, I don't know, cancer. I'm not willing you to use, I'm not willing for a scientist to use that for a different cause. That's the only one I want. Today, there is no other way to protect that. If I volunteer my database, anybody who does use that database will use it. I have no say in how the data is being used. Has lots of application for advertisement. I ride Uber, they get my data, and now they can use it who knows for what. Right? Maybe I'm okay for Uber using it for a particular use, but not for every use. So this technology allows you to approach this. I'm a computer scientist, I like to teach, so I'll tell you how it works. It's actually simple. This is a little bit of a simplification, but think about this. Imagine you have 3 people here, and they have secret salaries. Let's say these are $80,000, $30,000, and $50,000. And we want to compute the average salary or the sum of the salaries without anybody knowing each other's salary. So I'll show you how you can do this very simply. You can play this with your teenager kids or even elementary school kids. It's actually simple. So here's what you do. Every one of us, there's the yellow person, the green person, the blue person, can take their data and split it into 3 pieces, randomly. The 3 pieces add up to the original number. So the yellow will add up to 50. If you add these things, they're 50. Did you get that? Now, of course, these are totally random. Could be negative, could be positive, could be huge, billions, or whatever. As long as they add up to the 50 at the end, I'm happy. Everybody does that. And here's what I'll do. The yellow will send 1 yellow to blue, 1 yellow to green. You can see that the blue and green got garbage. They got just a random piece of data, right? Everybody sees that? So everyone here has their own, one of their pieces, we call them shares, and then 2 other shares from the other people. But for all practical purposes, the yellow guy doesn't know anything about the blue or the green. They got the random bit. We can add these pieces, and then we can tell each other what the sum is. The sum is 160. Guess what? It's actually the same as the original sum. And you can see why this will work. Addition is simple. Now, one thing you notice, I only needed to do 2 additions. I ended up doing more, right? I did splitting and communication. So there is overhead. This is not cheap. I never said it was cheap. What I'll say is that it's actually not as expensive as you think. For most, 95% of all the statistics that anybody cares about, anything you can do with Excel, this thing adds maybe 10% overhead. So the cost is actually low for most of the statistics that anybody in the government or actually most public health and all that stuff can do. So if you're going to do sophisticated machine learning, yeah, it may be expensive. Why? Because multiplication is harder. Addition is easy. Multiplication is a little harder, but it can be done. So, I don't want you to think that this is, it has its roots in math, and I can explain this, but I'll skip it. It basically is about using polynomial arithmetic where I represent, so if your secret is 32, I hide it in a function that has a bunch of random numbers, and I can do math on these functions. So let me skip that. So here's what we're doing at BU. This session is about platforms and technologies. We actually build platforms to do this. I'm not personally a statistician. I don't work in public health, but I want to enable all these sciences by building platforms. One thing we noticed immediately, and I'll be happy to talk about these and other projects, is that this notion of privacy-preserving analytics really has to be done based on the application at hand. There is no one-size-fits-all. There is no way I can just give you the equivalent of Microsoft Word to use. It's not a package you can install. And one thing we realized is that it's a very complicated ecosystem. There's a marketplace here. So let's think about it. Any study, and you heard throughout the 2 days, lots of studies. There is data owners, people who own the data, right? We call them contributors. These are the companies who have the payroll, right? These are entities very different. So these are the contributors. They make their data available. They may have some policies about privacy. So public universities have no problem publishing all the salaries. But a private university doesn't publish salaries, right? People who work for local government, their salaries are known. But people who work for Fidelity, their salaries are not known. So there is different companies, different contributors with different rules. HIPAA protected, FERPA protected, right? Now, there's also people who are interested in the value in this data. They themselves may have zero data. These are the social scientists. These are the government, the local government. These are the mayor of Boston. They don't have any of the data, but they are interested in answering a question. We call these the brokers. They identify who should contribute. They may come up with their incentives, et cetera. Who else is there? There's the data analysts. These are the statisticians. These are the biostatisticians. These are the people with the domain knowledge who want to ask the questions. Right? They write their code. They really just say, give me all the data. I can give you the answer because I can write the code. So these are the ones who write the program. These are the ones who tell you what the objective is. And these are the ones who have the data. Now, of course, it could be that they're all the same, right? It could be that I have the data and I can write the program and so on. But typically, there are different roles. Who else is there? Well, there's people who provide the solution to you. We call these the solution providers or service provider. And finally, somebody who distributes the code. As a matter of fact, BU is doing this. So our side of it is really the platform. We have no interest or even, we're not experts in any of these things, right? We have no data ourselves. But we want to do this as a service. And what we recognize is depending on the complexities of these relationships, different solutions will have to be developed. There is no one size fits all, and we have a number of these. I'll give you an example. We had 200 companies. Actually, this last one exercise we did for data, it's not data collection because we don't collect data, it's computation, right? We had 200 companies. Guess what technology was common to all of them? Remember, every company has to do something. This is a multi-party, right? All of them have to contribute. So we have to find something that's a common denominator. So what do you think they all have in common? Excel, a little bit maybe, well, yes, but remember, they have to talk to another, so Excel cannot talk. Browser. They all have an internet browser. This is the one thing they all have. Beyond that, some people have cloud, some people have 20-person small business pizzeria place, they don't have anything. They have an Excel spreadsheet on their laptop, right? The one thing they all have was a browser. So now we, the service provider, have to come up with a solution that works with browsers. And we have to do that in such a way that we don't store any data. My president, when we were doing this, calls me on a Saturday, says, Azer, we have lawyers here asking for an NDA from BU because we're involved in this very high-stakes thing. And I told him, NDA? Disclosure? Disclosing what? The whole point of this is that nobody gets to see the data. So he signed that piece of paper, but because lawyers wanted it, but not because there was any. So anyway, so we do this, and based on the specifics, we are designing multiple platforms. So I don't want you to give you an impression there's one platform, there's multiple. We have a platform for cloud. So if you are government agencies and your data is in the cloud, can we have the cloud do a solution for you? Right? So here are some of what I call killer apps. Systemic threat analytics in federated settings. So think about multiple agencies that have different networks, and they're all under attack by, let's say the Russians. If you're by yourself, you may not see the signal. There's a little bit of activity, but it's sort of maybe normal. But if I aggregate, I can see what's happening in the DoD and in the intelligence community and in the private sector. I can see, aha, the whole system is under attack now, right? So this is, think about bank and finance. Every bank has their own ways to make sure that they're okay, but the whole collapse was because of the network. But these banks are competitors. They're never going to share their data to each other, and they're fighting like crazy not to have the government see that data. Is there a way to do these checks without ever getting the data? And the answer is yes. So here's another example of collective intelligence in competitive settings. Multiple companies, Amazon and Walmart, they'd love to see each other's data, but they're not willing to give each other the data. Could they actually come up with aggregate analytics, separately? Well, let me maybe pick one more. The last one is particularly interesting. It's very recent. We just heard about this 2 weeks ago. So now companies are trying to do something about sexual harassment. It's a black eye for everybody, so we want to get ahead of the curve. And here's what they want to do. Lots of companies have hotlines. You can report that you have been abused or whatnot. Problem with the hotline is there's another person on the other end listening to you. And you have to trust them. If you are the accuser, well, I have to trust them. Still, I don't know who they are. What if there is nobody on the other end? What if I report this and I say, look, if more than 20 women come forward and accuse one person, then let me know because I'm willing to come out. Otherwise, I'm not interested. So they're approaching us with a binary system where every woman now or every person can have a bit into the computation. And if there is an aggregation of accusations that rises to a level of suspicion, then we can make it public. This way also protect the accused right? Somebody says, this person has done X, Y, and Z. How do you know? Maybe it's just one person. Let's wait until we see the signal, and that's a form of aggregation. So I'll stop here and say it takes a village. This is actually a lot of work. It's 4 years. I have to give credit to all the folks that helped us with this. There is actually a website called www.multiparty.org. All our software is open source. It has to be because you have to look at the source code. Otherwise, I could be just playing a big game on you and stealing all your data, right? So everything is open source. All these companies can see what we do. Take-home message for you. You can have it both ways. You can have utility of information and privacy. I am actually on a mission to say, do not force scientists to share their data. You're not going to do it, at least for some data. You can let scientists keep their data, but have collaborations through these approaches. So that's the first one, remember this. The second one, this is now a bunch of bullet sort of implications from me, societal implications. I have observed in my 4 years working on this, is that confidentiality and privacy is given as an excuse not to do something. It really isn't the case that this is really what worries them. They just don't want to do it. So when Google says, privacy, I don't want to give you the data, it's not clear whether this is really Google's way to say, we just want to avoid giving you the data, right? So privacy and confidentiality should not be used as an excuse. Privacy and confidentiality. On the other hand, you should not force, you should not sacrifice privacy to say I have a public good. So I'm also equally against the government saying you should give your data for the public good. I don't think that's good either, right? Private data should not be a tradable commodity. Today, you go on the web, all your data is out there, and it's being sold. And you don't get nothing out of it. Using techniques like this, I can own my data, and I can get compensated for its use. Maybe I'm a charity to get compensated. Finally, let me just say that when we make this technology known, social scientists come up with new questions they didn't dare ask before because they couldn't think it can be asked. So a good example is opioid, right? We want to figure out if there's a way to see who's going to be in sort of high risk. And the data you want from there include FERPA-protected data like school attendance. It has HIPAA-protected data because it's prescriptions and insurance. And you have police records. And all this data, we have lots of it. We know actually today who was victim for this. We can analyze and we can come up with new interventions or early intervention. And the reason we cannot do it is because nobody even dares ask the question because they know it cannot be done. And remember, this technology, we don't do de-anonymization. We don't remove your social security. We leave everything there because nothing actually gets relieved. So it's not about taking the data and removing all personal identifying information, which makes the data useless, by the way, because you cannot do linking. This allows you to do all the linking you want. It's just that what you compute is not, doesn't reveal anything beyond the aggregate. So with that, I'll leave you with the website, the institute, and happy to take questions.